You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. That never happened. I never said that. God, you always do this. You're making things up. Why do you always have to start something? If any of those phrases just landed somewhere in your body, if you felt a flicker of recognition, a tightening, a small involuntary nod, then this episode is for you. Today, we are talking about gaslighting, not the buzzword version, not the way it gets thrown around on social media to describe anyone who's ever told a lie or disagreed too strongly. The real thing. The specific, sustained, psychologically devastating thing that happens when someone you love uses your own mind against you. And by the end of this, I want you to have something you may not have had before. A clear, precise picture of what it is, how it works, how to recognize it in your own life, and most importantly, how to start trusting yourself again after it's been done to you. Let's begin. Hi, I'm Lisa, and this is the Pattern Breakers Collective, the podcast for women who are done sleepwalking through relationships that were never designed for them to thrive in. Every week, we dig into the psychology of why we get stuck, why we stay, and how we break free. Quick disclaimer before we go anywhere. When I talk about these dynamics, I'll use the pronoun he for the person causing harm. That reflects my years of work and my own lived experience, but abuse is not gendered. Anyone can cause harm. Anyone can be harmed. If your story looks different from the framing I use, this space is still for you. Now, before we talk about what gaslighting actually is, I want to talk about what it's become, because I think that distinction is where this episode needs to start. In 2022, Merriam-Webster named gaslighting its word of the year. Searches for the term had increased by 1,740% over the previous year. 1,740%. There wasn't a single event driving those searches. The word was just being looked up constantly, every single day, all year long. And on the surface, that sounds like a good thing. More people learning what it means. More women having a word for something that happened to them. More cultural awareness of a very real form of abuse. But here's the problem that came along with it. As gaslighting became a buzzword, as it made its way into reality TV recaps and political commentary and arguments between coworkers, it started to mean something different. It started to mean essentially lying or being wrong and not admitting it, or disagreeing with me too insistently. And mental health experts, including Robin Stern, PhD, the co-founder of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, who literally wrote the book on gaslighting, started raising an alarm. Because when a word gets diluted like this, something important gets lost. When gaslighting becomes a synonym for any ordinary deception or disagreement, women who are living inside of the real thing stop being able to identify it. And they stop being believed when they try to name it. So today, I want to give you back the real definition, the precise one, the one that describes what actually happens when someone systematically dismantles your relationship with your own reality. Not a disagreement, not defensiveness, not a lie told once in a moment of weakness. Something much more specific and much more serious. The term gaslighting comes from a 1938 play and then a 1944 film called Gaslight. In the story, a husband is secretly searching the attic of their home for hidden jewels. To do this, he has to turn on the gas lights up there, which causes the lights in the rest of the house to dim. When his wife notices the dimming lights and asks about it, he tells her she's imagining it, that the lights are perfectly normal, that she is losing her mind. His goal is to convince her that she is insane, so that he can have her committed to an institution and claim her inheritance. He uses her own perception, her own senses, as the weapon against her. That is where the term comes from, and that is what it still means in clinical practice. Merriam-Webster defines it as, and I want to read this carefully because every word matters, psychological manipulation of a person, usually over an extended period of time, that causes the victim to question the validity of their own thoughts, perception of reality, or memories, and typically leads to confusion, loss of confidence and self-esteem, uncertainty of one's emotional or mental stability, and a dependency on the perpetrator. Let me pull that apart because there are 4 things in that definition that separate gaslighting from ordinary lying or defensiveness. First, it is psychological manipulation, not just denial, not just he said, she said. It is a deliberate pattern of behavior designed to distort another person's perception. Second, it happens over an extended period of time. This is the crucial part. Gaslighting is not a single incident. It is a sustained campaign. The damage it does accumulates slowly like water wearing away a stone. So gradually that you don't notice it happening until you look up one day and you realize that you don't trust your own mind anymore. Third, it targets your thoughts, your perception of reality, and your memories. Not just whether something happened, but whether you are capable of actually knowing whether something happened. This is what separates it from regular lying. A liar says, that didn't happen. A gaslighter says, that didn't happen. And the fact that you think it did tells something about your mental state. And fourth, and this is the one I think that's most important to understand, it creates a dependency on the perpetrator. Because once your own mind becomes unreliable to you, you become increasingly reliant on him to tell you what is real. And he knows that. Often, he is counting on it. Gaslighting is not about winning an argument. It is about dismantling your ability to trust yourself so that you stop being able to advocate for yourself, resist him, or leave. Research published in peer-reviewed journals on intimate partner violence consistently links gaslighting to narcissistic traits, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, what researchers call the dark tetrad of personality. This is not someone who snapped in a moment of anger. This is someone who relates to other people as resources to be managed and controlled. Gaslighting is one of their primary tools, and they are extraordinarily good at it. Before we go any further, I want to address something because I think a lot of women get stuck here. Not every person who gets defensive is gaslighting you. Not every person who denies doing something wrong is a gaslighter. There is a very real difference between someone who is defensive, someone who has trouble taking feedback, who sometimes twists a situation to protect their ego, and someone who is systematically rewriting your reality. Here's how I distinguish them. 1, defensiveness is a reaction. It comes up in a specific moment, usually around a specific accusation or a piece of criticism. It feels like a wall going up. And here's the key part, a defensive person, even if they're frustrating in the moment, will often come around. The wall comes down, there's some kind of accountability. The conversation can reach some kind of resolution, even if it takes a while. 2, gaslighting is a strategy. It is consistent. It does not resolve. No matter how clearly you present your experience, no matter how calmly you explain what happened, the conversation ends the same way, with you being the problem, with you questioning yourself, with you feeling like maybe you really are too sensitive, too emotional, too unreasonable. Defensiveness makes you frustrated. Gaslighting makes you feel like you are losing your mind. The clearest signal I have found in clinical practice and my own life is this. After the conversation, do you feel clearer or more confused? A hard conversation with someone who is simply defensive can still reach a resolution. A conversation with someone who is gaslighting you always ends in fog. And here's where I'm going to bring in something personal for a moment. I remember a specific pattern in my own relationship. I would bring something up that had happened, something that I knew had happened, something I had experienced directly. And by the end of the conversation, I would be apologizing, Not because he convinced me I was wrong, but because I was so exhausted from the circular logic, so worn down by the process that apologizing felt like the only exit from that conversation. And then later, sometimes hours later, sometimes days, I would think, wait, why did I apologize? I was right. I know what happened. So why am I the one who feels guilty? That disorientation, that gap between what you know and what you end up feeling is the fingerprint of gaslighting. Hold on to that because we're going to come back to it. Now let's get specific, because one of the most powerful things I can give you today is the ability to recognize gaslighting language in real time, to hear a phrase and know immediately that's a tactic, not a truth. I want to walk you through the most common gaslighting phrases and tell you exactly what each one is designed to do, because none of these are random. They are precision instruments, and once you see them clearly, they lose some of their power. So first, you're too sensitive. This one is designed to make your emotional response the issue, so the original behavior never has to be examined. Once you accept that your reaction is the problem, you've handed him the ability to do anything and blame your response to it. Next, you're overreacting. A variation of the previous, but with an added implication that your perception is distorted. Not just that you feel too much, but that what you're feeling doesn't correspond to what actually happened. It's a small seed of doubt planted directly into your ability to read situations accurately. Next, that never happened. This is the most direct form of gaslighting, a flat denial of a documented, remembered, experienced reality. When he says this, he is not offering an alternative memory. He is telling you that your memory is wrong. Said often enough, it probably works. Next, I never said that. A close cousin to the previous, and often delivered with such certainty, such calm conviction that you start to wonder, did I mishear? Am I misremembering? Did I make that up? This is particularly effective because memory is genuinely fallible, and a skilled gaslighter exploits that vulnerability with precision. Next phrase, you always do this. This phrase does something specific. It turns a single incident into a pattern that is your fault. It reframes the conversation away from what just happened and toward your character, your chronic unreasonableness, your consistent problem making. It also subtly suggests that he is the stable one and you are the disruptive force. Next phrase. Why do you always have to start something? Gaslighting 101. Make the naming of the problem into the problem itself. If you say this, I'll stop raising issues entirely, because raising issues is itself the offense. This is one of the ways gaslighting enforces silence. Next phrase, you are being crazy. This is the most extreme version, the most psychologically damaging. Not just that you're wrong or unreasonable, but that you are mentally unwell. This phrase is designed to make you question your sanity, to make you afraid of your own mind. In the original Gaslight film, this was the husband's literal goal. In real relationships, it functions the exact same way. Next phrase, everyone else thinks you're overreacting too. This one brings up social proof, real or invented. It expands the gaslighting from the relationship into the world. Now, it's not just him saying you're unreasonable, it's everyone. It isolates you and suggests that any support you might seek will confirm his version of the events. Next phrase, you're remembering it wrong. Softer than that never happened, but equally effective. It doesn't deny the event, it concedes it happened, but insists your version of it is distorted. It pathologizes your memory specifically and positions him as the reliable narrator of a shared history. And last, I was just joking. You can't even take a joke. This is a particularly insidious one because it gives him plausible deniability. He said something cruel, you reacted to the cruelty, and now you're the humorless one, oversensitive, the one who can't tell the difference between a joke and an attack. Used consistently, this trains you to accept the cruelty without responding to it. There are so many more. These are not all of them. But what I want you to hear across all of these is a consistent architecture. Every single one of these phrases does the exact same thing. It takes the focus off of his behavior and puts it onto your perception, your memory, your emotional state, your character. In gaslighting, the conversation never stays about what he did. It always ends up being about what is wrong with you for thinking he did it. Here's the thing that makes gaslighting so different from other forms of abuse and so particularly devastating. It gets worse over time. Not because he necessarily escalates the tactics, but because the cumulative effect of sustained reality denial is that your relationship with your own mind deteriorates gradually, and then, if you're honest, pretty quick. Researchers who study this describe a recognizable progression. In the early stages, you are able to maintain your own sense of reality. You know something is off. You push back, you argue, you defend yourself. But over time, as the pattern repeats, as the fog accumulates, as the exhaustion of constantly defending your own perception sets in, something shifts. You stop arguing, not because you've accepted his version of events, but because the arguing leads nowhere and costs you way too much. And then, and this is the part I need you to sit with, you start to preempt the argument. You stop saying what you think before he's had a chance to tell you what to think. You catch yourself and say, yeah, maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I am misremembering. Maybe this isn't as bad as it feels. And you just move on. You have, at that point, internalized his voice. He no longer has to gaslight you. You're doing it to yourself. This is the end game of sustained gaslighting. Not just that you doubt him, but that you have become the person who doubts yourself on his behalf. The clinical research on this is sobering. Studies consistently find that prolonged gaslighting is associated with significant psychological harm, depression, anxiety, PTSD symptoms, severely diminished self-esteem, and what researchers describe as loss of self. Not just confidence, the self, the sense of who you are, what you know, what you can trust about your own experience. One study put it this way: individuals who experience gaslighting may, at first, be able to preserve their sense of reality, but as the gaslighting continues, they may start feeling confused and surreal, that reality is neither clear nor logical, and that they are losing their sense of self and independence. That description, does that sound familiar? That particular fog, that particular feeling of unreality, that sense that you used to know yourself and you can't quite locate that person anymore, that is not you being mentally fragile. That is you responding to something that is genuinely disorienting, something that was specifically designed to disorient you. I want to spend some time here because I think this is one of the things I hear most often from women who have been through this, and it's one of the things that I felt most personally. How did I not see it? I'm not stupid. I'm educated. I know about psychology. I've read books about this. How did it happen to me? And I want to answer that question directly and completely. Intelligent, self-aware women are not more susceptible to gaslighting despite their intelligence. They are more susceptible because of it. Here's what I mean. Gaslighting works by introducing doubt about your own perception. And the most effective way to introduce that doubt into a thoughtful, reflective, self-aware person is to exploit the very capacities that make her thoughtful and reflective. You are the kind of person who questions herself, who considers alternative perspectives, who genuinely wants to be fair, who takes seriously the possibility that she might be wrong, who holds herself to a high standard of accountability. Those are beautiful qualities. In a healthy relationship, they make you an extraordinary partner. But in the hands of a gaslighter, there are vulnerabilities. Because when he says you're overreacting, you don't dismiss it. You actually consider it. You apply your intelligence and your self-awareness to the question of whether he might be right. And that process of genuine consideration is exactly what he is counting on. A gaslighter doesn't need to break you down. He just needs to borrow your own analytical mind long enough for it to work against you. There is also research suggesting that women who grew up in households where their perceptions were regularly minimized or dismissed are more vulnerable to gaslighting in adulthood. Not because they're weak, but because they were trained from an early age to prioritize another person's version of reality over their own. If you learned as a child that your feelings were too much or that the adults around you were always right even when something felt wrong, that pattern becomes the blueprint your nervous system reaches for in intimate relationships. Listen, understanding this is not about blame. It is not about explaining away what happened to you. It is about removing the self-blame that so often sits on top of the original harm, and it makes it harder to recover from. You were not foolish. You were trusting. You were self-reflective. You were trying to be fair. Those things were used against you. That is on him, not on you. Now I want to talk about something that I don't hear discussed nearly enough when it comes to gaslighting. Most people focus on the cognitive experience, the confusion, the self-doubt, the difficulty knowing what's real. And those things are real and they are important. But there is something that often comes first before the mind has processed anything, before you have a single coherent thought about what's happening. Your body knows. There is a physical sensation that I have heard described by dozens of women in dozens of different ways that all point to the same thing. A tightening of the chest, a sense of the ground shifting, a feeling in the stomach, not quite nausea, but close, that something is wrong, even when the conversation sounds reasonable. An exhaustion that descends after a certain kind of exchange that has nothing to do with how long you talked. Your nervous system is registering something that your conscious mind is being successfully argued out of. The body is keeping score even while the mind is being convinced to change its answer. I remember this so clearly from my own experience. There were conversations where by the end, I genuinely couldn't tell you what was true. I was so turned around, so tangled in the logic of who said what and what I'd meant and what he'd meant that I couldn't find my way back to my original thought. But my body knew. There was a quality to the feeling afterward, a specific kind of flatness, a heaviness, like a sense of something having been taken that was completely consistent every time. Even when my mind was confused, my body was not. Your body is not confused. Your body does not gaslight itself. If something in your body is consistently saying wrong, even when your mind is being talked out of it, that signal is worth trusting more than any explanation he has given you. This is also why I think one of the early warning signs of gaslighting that doesn't get enough attention is a specific kind of fatigue. Not physical tiredness necessarily, more like the depletion that comes from having done something cognitively and emotionally demanding. Except the demanding thing was just talking to your partner about what happened at dinner. Conversations with a gaslighter are exhausting because they are genuinely cognitively demanding. Your brain is working overtime trying to reconcile what you know with what you're being told, trying to find the logic that will make everything add up. It never adds up because the logic isn't the point. The confusion is the point. Pay attention to how your body feels after difficult conversations with him. Not just what was said, how you feel. That is the data that is worth writing down so that you can begin to see the pattern even when he insists that there isn't one. We talked in the previous episode about the different presentations of narcissistic personality patterns, the grandiose, the vulnerable, the communal, and so on. I want to connect that conversation to this one explicitly. Because gaslighting and narcissistic abuse are not the same thing, but they are profoundly interconnected. Research consistently finds narcissistic traits, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism in the personality profiles of people who use gaslighting tactics. And understanding why these personality types gaslight helps make sense of something that otherwise seems incomprehensible. Why would someone do this deliberately? For someone with narcissistic patterns, the relationship exists to meet their needs. Full stop. not your needs, theirs. And the primary threat to that arrangement is your ability to have and defend a reality that differs from theirs. Because if you can trust your own perception, if you can accurately see what's happening, you might leave. You might demand accountability. You might refuse to organize your life around their comfort. Gaslighting neutralizes that threat. It keeps you uncertain, self-doubting, and dependent. It makes you easier to manage. And because narcissistic people are extraordinarily skilled at reading other people, their needs, their insecurities, their attachment styles, they know exactly which levers to pull to make you doubt yourself most efficiently. This is not an accident. Research confirms that gaslighting is strategic. It is behavior that is intended to compel the partner to submit, to stop questioning, to become compliant. Whether or not the gaslighter is consciously aware of this, the function is the same. Gaslighting is not what happens when someone doesn't know how to communicate. It is what happens when someone is very good at it, good enough to use communication as a weapon. And I also want to name something here that I think is really important for women who are still questioning whether this applies to them. You do not need to prove that he is diagnosed as a narcissist. You do not need a personality assessment or a therapist's evaluation of him to trust your own experience. The framework is a tool for understanding patterns, not a diagnosis you have to achieve before your experience is allowed to be real. What you need is pattern recognition. And if the pattern fits, if the descriptions of the gaslighting language, the gaslighting behavior, and the impact of gaslighting on your sense of self fit your experience, that is what matters. Okay, so let's talk about what you can actually do. Because education about gaslighting without practical tools is like handing someone a map with no compass. I want to give you 5 concrete things, not a 10-step program, 5 things you can start today at whatever stage you're in, whether you're still inside of the relationship or out of it, whether you're certain or still uncertain. First, start keeping a record. Not for a court case, not for confrontation, for yourself. Write down what happened as close to the moment as possible in as much detail as you can. What was said, what you were feeling, what your body felt like, date and time it. This does 2 things. First, it creates a record that cannot be rewritten. When he tells you that you're misremembering, you have the entry. Second, and this is actually more important, the act of writing it down keeps your version of reality anchored somewhere outside of your head. It gives your truth a place to live that he doesn't have access to. Now, if you're worried about him finding a journal, use a private notes app on your phone with a password he doesn't know or an email entry to a trusted friend. The median doesn't matter. The record does. Second, name the tactic in real time to yourself. You do not have to say it to him. In fact, naming it to him often escalates the gaslighting. But the moment you hear a phrase like you're overreacting or that never happened or you're too sensitive, I want you to have a quiet internal response. Something like, that is a gaslighting tactic. I am not confused. I know what happened. I know this sounds small, but it is not small. It creates a tiny gap between his assertion and your acceptance of it. And that gap, practiced consistently, becomes a barrier that he cannot cross as easily. Number 3, stop trying to convince him. I know this one is hard because it feels like giving up, but I want to reframe it. You are not going to win a gaslighting conversation, not because you're wrong, because the point of a gaslighting conversation is to not reach truth. It is to exhaust and confuse you. Every time you engage in the circular argument, you are playing a game that is designed for you to lose. What you can do instead is disengage. Name your experience for yourself and stop trying to make him validate it. Just say, I know what I experienced. I don't need him to agree for it to be real. That sentence, repeated internally, is not defeat. It is the beginning of you taking back your reality. Number 4, find a trusted outside perspective. One of the most insidious effects of gaslighting is isolation. either literal isolation from your support network or the internal isolation of no longer trusting your own account of events enough to share it. Find one person, a friend, a family member, a therapist, anyone who you trust to give you an honest reflection of what you're describing. Not someone who will automatically take your side, someone who will listen and respond to what you're actually saying. The experience of having your reality reflected back accurately, of someone saying, yeah, what you described is not okay, or no, that's not normal, is genuinely therapeutic. It's not validation seeking, it is reality checking, and it is essential. And number 5, I cannot overstate this enough, and I'm not being biased just because I'm a therapist. Work with a trauma-informed therapist, not just any therapist, someone who specifically understands gaslighting, coercive control, and the way prolonged psychological abuse affects the nervous system and the sense of self. The research is clear that psychotherapy is a valuable and often essential tool for recovery from gaslighting, not because you are broken, but because the kind of self-trust that gaslighting dismantles needs to be rebuilt carefully with support. A good trauma-informed therapist will help you do that. They will also help you distinguish between the thoughts that are genuinely yours and the thoughts that were installed by someone else. I like to close things in 2 parts because I think you deserve them both. The first is anger. I want you to feel something on behalf of every version of yourself that sat across from him and tried to explain what you had experienced clearly, calmly, with evidence, and ended up apologizing. Every version of you that lay awake at night trying to reconstruct the logic of a conversation that had no logic. Every version of you that looked in the mirror and wondered if you were losing your mind. She deserved better than that. She deserved someone who said, I hear you. I understand what you're saying. Let me think about that. She deserved a partner, not an adversary. She deserved a relationship where her perception of reality was a given, not a battleground. What was done to her was deliberate. It was not clumsiness. It was not poor communication. It was someone systematically dismantling her trust in herself so that she would be easier to manage. That deserves to be named exactly for what it is, abuse. And you are allowed to be furious about it, fully, completely, without qualification. Now, the second part is hope. Here's what I know to be true. The self that gaslighting dismantled is not gone. She is underneath. She is the one who woke up at 3 a.m. with the uncomfortable thought, wait, why did I apologize? She is the one who noticed the dimming of the lights, even when she was told that she was imagining it. She is the one who brought you to this podcast today. She is the one who's been there the whole time, trying to get your attention, trying to tell you that something is wrong, and she was right. Rebuilding self-trust after gaslighting is not quick. It is not linear. There will be days when you catch yourself doing it to yourself, preempting the argument, dismissing your own experience before anyone else has a chance to. That is okay. Name it when it happens. That is the beginning. The goal is not to become someone who never doubts herself. The goal is to become someone whose doubts come from her own honest reckoning, not from someone else's deliberate effort to disorient her. That distinction between genuine self-reflection and installed self-doubt is everything. And learning to feel the difference between them and your body in real time is what recovery from gaslighting actually looks like. You are not crazy. You were never crazy. You were someone who trusted a person who used that trust against you. And now you are someone who's going to know the difference. Until next time, keep breaking every pattern that was never yours to carry.